The rain fell hard on the streets of New Meridian that night, and Kale pressed his thin body against the cold wall of the alley. Watching the restaurant district come alive with lights and laughter, he was 12 years old, though he looked younger because hunger had kept him small, and his clothes were torn rags that offered no protection against the wind that cut through the colony streets. Like a knife, New Meridian was a human world, but it did not belong to humans anymore, and everyone who lived there knew this truth in their bones. The Drakari had come from the stars 50 years ago. Massive warriors covered in scales that shimmered like metal, with golden eyes that burned with ancient fire and claws that could tear through steel like paper. They called themselves protectors, but Kale knew what they really were, and so did every human who had watched their parents bow and scrape before these dragon lords who took whatever they wanted tonight. The restaurant district was full of Drakari officers celebrating some victory in a distant war, their deep voices rumbling like thunder as they feasted on meats and delicacies that cost more than a human family earned in a year. Kale watched them through the window of the finest establishment on the street, his empty stomach twisting with pain as he saw them tear into roasted creatures and drink from golden cups he had not eaten in 3 days. And the hunger was becoming something alive inside him, a creature that screamed and clawed at his insides with every passing hour. His parents had been scientists once, brilliant minds who worked in the Drakari mining facilities, and they had promised him that things would get better, that humanity would find its place in this new order. But then the accident happened, the explosion that killed 40 humans, including his mother and father. And Kale had learned the truth from whispered conversations he was never meant to hear. There was no accident, only a failed weapons test that the Drakari covered up. And human lives meant nothing to the empire that ruled the stars. Now Kale survived by scavenging, by waiting in alleys until the restaurants closed and the workers threw out the scraps that even the dogs would not eat. And he had become very good at being invisible. But tonight something was different, and Kale found his eyes drawn to a lone figure sitting at a table outside one of the smaller taverns. The Drakari was old, older than any Kale had ever seen, and his scales had faded from bright crimson to a dull rust color that spoke of centuries of life scars covered his massive frame. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, each one a story of battle and survival that Kale could not begin to imagine. Old warriors sat alone while other Drakari celebrated in groups, and there was something in his golden eyes that looked almost like sadness as he stared at the meal before him. Half the food remained untouched on his plate, more meat than Kale had seen in months, and the boy felt his legs moving before his mind could stop them. This was dangerous. He knew because the Drakari did not like humans approaching them, and many had been beaten or killed for less than what he was about to do, but the hunger was louder than his fear, and his feet carried him across the wet street until he stood before the ancient warrior like a mouse approaching a sleeping dragon. The old Drakari looked up, and Kale saw those golden eyes focus on him with an intensity that made his heart stop. And for a moment neither of them moved or spoke. "Can I have the leftovers?" Kale asked, and his voice came out stronger than he expected. Maybe because he was too tired to be properly afraid anymore. He braced himself for the blow that would surely come, for the roar of anger or the casual swipe of claws that would end his short and miserable life on this rainy street. But the blow never came, and the silence stretched between them until Kale dared to look up at the massive face looming above him. The old Drakari was studying him with an expression Kale had never seen on one of their kind before. Something that almost looked like curiosity, mixed with a strange and ancient pain. "What is your name, small one?" the warrior asked, and his voice was deep but not cruel. Rough from years of shouting commands across battlefields, but somehow gentle in this moment. "Kale," the boy answered. And he did not know why he gave his real name instead of running away. "Kale," the old dragon repeated. as if tasting the word, and then he did something. That shocked the boy more than any violence could have. He pushed back the chair across from him with one massive clawed foot and gestured toward it with a hand that could have crushed Kale's skull like an egg. "Sit," the warrior commanded. And there was iron in his voice, but also something else. Something almost warm beneath the authority. "You will not eat my scraps like an animal. You will eat beside me, as my guest." Kale stood frozen, certain this was some kind of trick, because no Drakari had ever treated a human as an equal in the entire history of the Maya occupation, but the old warrior simply waited, patient as a mountain, and something in those ancient eyes told Kale that this was real, that this impossible moment was actually happening slowly, as if moving through a dream. Kale climbed into the chair that was far too big for him and sat across from the most terrifying creature he had ever seen. The Drakari called for more food, and the serving staff nearly fainted at the sight of a human child sitting at a table with General Vara Ironscale, the legendary commander who had conquered more worlds than most could name, but they brought the food anyway. Plates piled high with things Kale had only dreamed about. And the old warrior watched as the boy ate with desperate hunger that he tried and failed to hide. "Tell me, young Kale," Vorath said as the boy devoured his first real meal in months, "what do you think of the Drakari?" It was a dangerous question, the kind that could get a human killed. But Kale found that he was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding his true thoughts behind a mask of submission. "I think you came from the stars and took everything from us," he said between bites. "I think you killed my parents, and you do not care. I think you see us as insects and nothing more." He expected anger. He expected punishment, but Vorath only nodded slowly. And that strange sadness returned to his ancient eyes. "You looked me in the eye when you asked for food," the old dragon said quietly. "You did not crawl or beg or grovel like others of your kind have learned to do. In 300 years of war, you are the first being brave enough to ask me for something while meeting my gaze. Your people do not kneel in their hearts, even when their bodies must, and that is worthy of respect." Kale did not understand what was happening, but he knew that something had changed in this moment, something important that would echo through the years to come. The rain continued to fall on New Meridian, but for the first time in his young life, Kale felt something other than cold and hunger and fear. He felt seen, and he felt the impossible warmth of hope beginning to kindle in his chest, like a tiny flame that refused to die. The weeks that followed changed everything for Kale, though he did not understand it at first, and he spent many nights wondering if he had somehow dreamed that impossible meal with the old dragon warrior. But Vorath kept appearing in his life, like a ghost that refused to fade, finding Kale in the alleys and abandoned buildings where he made his home, always bringing food and asking questions that no Drakari had ever asked before. "Tell me about your schools," the old warrior would say, settling his massive body onto broken crates that groaned under his weight. "Tell me what human children learn. Tell me about your music and your stories and the games you play." Kale was suspicious at first, because kindness from a Drakari was like water in a desert, something too rare to be trusted. And he kept waiting for the trap to spring shut around him, but days became weeks and the trap never came. And slowly the boy began to talk, began to share pieces of himself that he had locked away since his parents died. He told Vorath about Earth, the distant homeworld that humans still dreamed about, even though most had never seen it. A blue planet covered in oceans and forests and cities that reached toward the sky. He told him about the colony before the Drakari came, when humans governed themselves and children went to school and families ate dinner together without fear. And he told him about the accident, about the explosion that took his parents and 40 other humans, about the lies the Drakari told afterward. They said it was human error, Kale said. His small hands clenched into fists. They said my father made a mistake with the equipment. But I heard the guards talking when they thought no one was listening. It was a weapons test, something they were building in secret. And when it failed, they blamed the humans and swept our bodies into unmarked graves. Varth was silent for a long time. After hearing this, and Kale watched the old warrior's face twist with something that looked almost like shame. I did not know. Varth finally said, and his voice was heavy with a weight that 3 centuries of war had placed upon his shoulders. I conquered worlds and told myself I was bringing order. I told myself the Drakari were spreading civilization to lesser species who needed our guidance. But I never stopped to look. I never asked what my empire was building on the bones of the people we claimed to protect. This was not what Kale expected to hear. And he stared at the old dragon with new eyes, seeing for the first time that Varth was not simply a monster, but something more complicated. Why do you care? The boy asked, and the question came out sharper than he intended. Why does one human orphan matter to a general who has killed millions? Varth let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sigh, and he looked up at the broken ceiling above them as if searching for answers in the stars he could not see. Because I am old. Young Kale, older than your entire colony, and I have spent my life believing that strength is everything. But strength without honor is just cruelty wearing a mask. And I am beginning to see that my people have forgotten the difference. Word spread through the Drakari garrison that General Varth had lost his mind, that the legendary conqueror had become obsessed with a human street rat. And the mockery was vicious, and constant young officers laughed behind his back and called him weak, said his scales had gone soft with age, said he should be put down like any other beast past its usefulness. Some were bold enough to challenge him directly, puffing up their chests and demanding he explain why he shamed their species by treating a human as an equalworth. Answered these challenges the old way, with claws and teeth and the terrible skill of a warrior who had survived 1,000 battles. And each young fool who stepped forward was beaten into the ground within seconds, but the victories brought him no joy. And Kale saw the weariness in the old dragon's eyes grow deeper with each passing day. They hate you now, Kale said one evening as Varth tended to a wound on his arm. A gift from a particularly stupid lieutenant. Your own people hate you because of me. Let them hate, Varth answered without looking up. I have carried the weight of empire on my scales for 300 years, and I am tired of pretending it does not crush me. Your people should hate us, Kale. We have given you every reason. And yet here you sit sharing bread with the enemy instead of trying to slit my throat. Why is that, I wonder? Kale thought about the question for a long time before answering, turning it over in his mind like a stone pulled from a river. Because hate takes energy, he finally said. And we need all our energy just to survive. But also because my mother used to say that every creature has a choice, even the ones who seem like monsters. And maybe some of them choose to be better. Varth looked at the boy then, really looked at him. And something shifted in those ancient golden eyes like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of a world. Your mother was wise, the old dragon said quietly. And I wish I had met her before my people took her from you. But I will tell you something, young Kale. Something I have never admitted to anyone in my long and bloody life. I am afraid, not of death. Death is an old friend I have been avoiding for centuries. But of what I have become, of what my empire has become, of the legacy we will leave when our scales finally turn to dust. I looked at you that first night in the rain, and I saw something I have forgotten existed. I saw courage without cruelty. I saw dignity in the face of despair. I saw a small creature who should have been broken by everything we did to his people, standing tall and looking me in the eye. And I realized that humans are not the lesser species we have been telling ourselves you are. You are something else entirely. Something that survives and adapts and refuses to surrender, even when surrender is the only logical choice. Your people do not know how to stop fighting, even when the fight seems hopeless, and that terrifies me more than any army I have ever faced." Kale did not know what to say to this confession, so he simply sat in silence and shared the last of the bread with the ancient warrior, who had somehow become his only friend in the world. Outside, the twin moons of New Meridian rose above the broken skyline, and somewhere in the shadows of the city, the wheels of change had already begun to turn. They came for Kale on a night when the moons were hidden behind thick clouds, and he never saw them until the bag was over his head and rough hands were dragging him through the darkness. He fought and kicked and bit, because survival had taught him to never stop struggling. But there were too many of them, and they were too strong. And soon he found himself tied to a chair in a room that smelled of rust and old blood when the bag came off his head. Kale blinked in the harsh light and found himself staring at a woman with scars across her face and eyes that burned with a hatred he recognized all too well. "My name is Sarah," the woman said, and her voice was cold as the steel blade she held against his throat. "And I lead what remains of the human resistance on this rock. You have been seen with General Vareth Ironscale, eating with him, talking with him, and my people want to know why a human boy would betray his own species." "I am not a traitor," Kale said, and he was surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "Vareth is different from the others. He wants to help us." Sarah laughed, and it was an ugly sound full of pain and bitter experience. And the people standing behind her murmured angrily, "A Drakari who wants to help humans," she spat. "Do you know how many times I have heard that lie, boy? They use us and throw us away like garbage. And any human fool enough to trust them ends up dead or worse. I'm going to kill you tonight. Not because I enjoy it, but because we cannot allow collaborators to walk free. Because your death will send a message to others who might be tempted to crawl to the dragons for scraps." Kale closed his eyes and thought about all the ways his short life could have been different, all the futures that would never come to pass. And he felt a strange peace settle over him before Sarah could draw her blade across his throat. The wall exploded inward, and a massive figure stepped through the smoke, and Debrisworth Ironscale stood in the ruins of the Resistance hideout, his old scales covered in dust and his golden eyes blazing with a fury that made everyone in the room step backward. "Release the boy," the dragon commanded, and his voice echoed off the walls like thunder rolling down from the mountain. Sarah held her ground even as her fighters scattered, and Kale saw that she was either very brave or very foolish. "Perhaps both. You have no power here, monster," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "Kill me if you want. There will be others to take my place. There will always be others. I did not come here to kill anyone," Vareth said, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. "I came to offer you something far more valuable. I came to offer you the truth." He reached slowly into his armor and pulled out a data crystal that glowed with soft blue light, and he placed it on the ground between them like an offering. "Fleet movements," Vareth said. "Weapons stockpiles, guard rotations. The names of every Drakari officer who has committed crimes against humans on this world. Everything you need to start a real rebellion instead of hiding in basements and killing your own people." Sarah stared at the crystal as if it might bite her, and Kale could see the war happening behind her eyes. The desperate need to believe fighting against years of betrayal and loss. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you betray your own kind for creatures you have spent centuries conquering?" Vareth looked at Kale, and the boy saw something new in those ancient eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. "Because a boy asked me for leftovers," the old dragon said. "And when I looked into his eyes, I saw what my empire has truly made of this galaxy. We have become devourers, not warriors. We have forgotten that strength without honor is meaningless. There is no glory in starving children. There is no victory in crushing those who cannot fight back. I was a conqueror once. I believed in the righteousness of the Drakari way, but I cannot believe anymore. Not after seeing the truth through human eyes. Sierra picked up the crystal slowly, turning it over in her scarred hands. And when she looked up at Vorath, her expression had changed. If this is a trick, she said quietly, I will find a way to kill you, even if it takes the rest of my life. It is not a trick, Vorath answered. But you should know that my choice will bring hunters, the Obsidian Claw, the deadliest assassins in the Empire. They will come for me, and they will destroy anyone standing beside me. Then we better start preparing, Sarah said. And something like a smile crossed her face for the first time. Because humans are very good at surviving things that should kill us. In the days that followed, Vorath began training Kale in ways the boy never expected. Not in Drakari combat, which would have been useless for a creature so small, but in human history and human potential. Your species should have died 1,000 times, Vorath told him as they studied ancient Earth records together. Ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. And yet you survived them all. You crossed oceans in wooden boats. You flew before you should have been able to fly. You reached for the stars when you had every reason to stay on the ground and give up. The Drakari conquered the galaxy through strength. But humans do something else entirely. You adapt. You endure. You turn your weaknesses into weapons and your failures into lessons. You are like fire. Young Kale, you do not know how to stop burning. And that is why I believe your people will outlast my empire. Kale listened and learned and felt something growing inside him. Something that had been buried since his parents died. A sense of purpose that burned brighter with each passing day. Obsidian Claw was coming. 12 of the deadliest warriors the Drakari had ever produced. And soon New Meridian would become a battleground, but for the first time in his life, Kale was not afraid of what the future held. He was ready to show the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped bowing and started fighting back. The Obsidian Claw arrived on a ship as black as the void between stars, and the people of New Meridian felt the shadow of death pass over them as it descended through the clouds. 12 warriors emerged from that dark vessel, each one a legend of slaughter, each one wearing armor forged from the bones of species that no longer existed. And their leader was a massive dragon named Karth, whose scales had turned pure obsidian from bathing in the blood of his enemies. They marched through the streets of the colony without speaking, and humans scattered before them like leaves before a storm. And soon they stood in the central plaza and demanded that the traitor, Vorath Ironscale, be delivered to them. Any human who surrenders the old fool will be granted amnesty, Korath announced, his voice booming across the silent city. Any human who hides him will share his fate. We give you 1 hour to decide. The resistance watched from their hidden positions throughout the city, weapons ready, hearts pounding. And Sarah turned to look at the humans gathered around her with a question in her eyes. No one moved toward the plaza, and no one spoke of betrayal. And as the minutes ticked past, something remarkable happened. Word spread through the underground networks that connected every oppressed human on New Meridian. And the answer came back the same from every corner of the colony. Not one human would surrender Vorath Ironscale. Not one would step forward to claim the amnesty. Not one would betray the dragon who had chosen to stand with them. Sarah laughed when she heard the reports. A real laugh this time, full of wonder and fierce pride. Those fools have no idea what they are dealing with, she said, checking her weapon one final time. They think we are beaten dogs who will roll over for treats. They do not understand that loyalty is not something you can buy from humans. You earn it. And that old dragon earned it when he saw a hungry child and chose to see a person. When the hour ended and no one came forward, Korath's rage shook the buildings around the plaza, and the Obsidian Claw spread out into the city to hunt their prey. But the humans were ready. And the battle for New Meridian began with explosions that lit up the night sky like a second sunrise. They Intelligence Vorath had provided proved devastating, and resistance fighters struck at weapon caches and communication towers with surgical precision, crippling the Drakari infrastructure in a matter of hours above the planet. A team of humans that Syrah had smuggled onto the orbital station fought their way to the main weapons array and disabled the cannons that could have burned. The colony Kale fought beside Vorath in the streets of the district where they had first met. 2 years older now, but still small compared to the dragons around him. Armed with a human-made rifle and a determination that burned hotter than any plasma fire. "Stay behind me," Vorath commanded as 3 members of the Obsidian Claw closed in on their position. "These are not ordinary warriors." "Neither am I," Kale answered. And he opened fire on the approaching dragons, aiming for the gaps in their armor that Vorath had taught him to find. Old Dragon moved with a speed that seemed impossible for someone his age, meeting the assassins with claws and teeth and 300 years of combat experience. And Kale watched in awe as Vorath fought like a force of nature, but the claw was 12 warriors strong. And even a legend could not be everywhere at Vorath took wounds that would have killed a lesser creature, kept fighting through injuries that turned his faded scales dark with blood. And slowly the tide of battle began to turn against him when Korath himself finally appeared, stepping over the bodies of his fallen brothers with murder in his obsidian eyes. Kale knew that the end was near. "You disgrace our entire species," Korath growled, circling Vorath like a predator closing in for the kill. 300 years of glory thrown away for a pack of human vermin. "I will make your death last for days, old fool. And when I am finished, there will be nothing left for the history books to remember." Vorath glanced back at Kale, and the boy saw something in those ancient golden eyes that looked like peace, like acceptance, like a soul finally finding the purpose it had been searching for. "Get the others to safety," Vorath said quietly. "This is my fight now. I am not leaving you," Kale answered, gripping his rifle with hands that refused to shake. "You must," Vorath said, "because someone needs to survive to tell this story. Someone needs to carry the fire forward. And it cannot be me. I have lived long enough, young Ember, and I am choosing how my story ends." The 2 dragons clashed with a fury that cracked the stone beneath their feet, and Kale was forced back by the sheer violence of their battle, watching helplessly as his only friend traded blow for blow with the deadliest assassin in the Empire of Reth. Was faster than Korath expected, smarter, more desperate, and the old warrior fought with nothing held back because he had nothing left to lose when the final blow fell. It was Vorath who struck it, driving his claws through Korath's throat as the assassin's blade pierced his own chest. Both dragons fell together, and Kale ran to Vorath's side as the sounds of battle faded around them. The old warrior was dying. That much was clear. But there was a smile on his scarred face as he looked up at the human boy who had changed everything. "You asked for scraps," Vorath whispered, his voice growing weaker with each word. "But you were never small, Kale. You were never broken. Your people are fire, and fire cannot be contained forever." With trembling claws, Vorath reached for the ceremonial blade at his side, a weapon that had been passed down through his family for generations, a symbol of honor that no Drakari had ever given to an outsider. He pressed it into Kale's hands and held them there with the last of his strength, burn bright. "Little Ember," Vorath said, "show the galaxy what humans truly are." And then the light faded from those ancient golden eyes, and General Vorath Aernscale, the legendary conqueror who had chosen compassion over cruelty, was gone. Kale held the blade against his chest and let the tears fall freely, grieving for the friend he had found in the most unlikely of places. But even through his grief, he felt the fire that Vorath had spoken of burning brighter inside him. And he knew that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The humans of New Meridian had won their first battle, and the news would spread across the stars like wildfire. and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. 10 years had passed since the night Vareth died in the streets of New Meridian, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The rebellion that began with one old dragon and a hungry boy had spread like wildfire across Drakari space, jumping from world to world as the story of what happened on New Meridian gave hope to billions of oppressed people. Humans proved to be terrifyingly effective warriors when they stopped trying to fight like Drakari and started fighting like humans, using guerrilla tactics and improvised weapons in a stubborn refusal to accept defeat that drove their enemies mad with frustration. Other species joined them, races that had suffered under Drakari rule for generations, and together they formed a coalition that chipped away at the Empire year after year until the cracks became too large to ignore. The Drakari Empire did not fall all at once, but it fractured from within as younger warriors questioned the old ways and demanded to know why they were fighting to preserve a system that had lost its honor. Some of them had heard the story of Vareth Ironscale, had heard about the general who gave up everything because a human child looked him in the eye and asked for food. And those stories planted seeds of doubt that grew into something the Empire could not control now. On a space station that hung between the stars, the First Galactic Council was meeting to establish a new order, one where humans would have equal standing with the species that had once ruled over them. Mikhail stood outside the Great Chamber, 24 years old now, his childhood hunger replaced by lean muscle, and his tattered rags replaced by the simple uniform of a human ambassador. Vareth's blade hung at his side, cleaned and polished, a reminder of the friend who had believed in him before he learned to believe in himself. Sarah walked up beside him and placed a scarred hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with the same fierce pride that had burned there on the night of the battle. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," Kale admitted, "but I do not think anyone is ever ready for moments like this." "Good," Sarah said with a smile. "That means you are still human." The doors opened and Kale walked into the chamber, past delegates from 100 different species, past Drakari reformists who bowed their heads in respect, past humans who had traveled from colonies across the galaxy to witness this moment. He took his place at the central podium and looked out at the assembly, and he saw that they were all watching him, waiting to hear what the legendary human leader would say. A Drakari delegate rose from his seat, one of the reformists who had helped negotiate the peace, and his voice echoed through the chamber. "Ambassador Kale, you have been asked to speak about the war, about how humanity rose from subjugation to stand as equals among the stars. Many here wish to understand how your species achieved what seemed impossible. Will you tell us?" Kale was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts, and when he spoke his voice was calm and clear. "You want to know how humanity won?" he said, and a sad smile crossed his face. "We did not win. Not really, we just refused to lose. Every time your empire knocked us down, we got back up. Every time you told us we were nothing, we proved you wrong. Every time you tried to break our spirit, we found reasons to keep going. But that is not the story I came here to tell." He reached down and touched the hilt of Vareth's blade, drawing strength from the memory of the friend who had carried it for centuries. "I want to tell you about a hungry boy and an old warrior who shared a meal." The chamber fell silent as Kale spoke, telling the story from the beginning, from the rain falling on New Meridian to the final battle in the streets where Vareth gave his life. He told them about the general who could have ignored a starving child, but chose instead to see a person, about the questions Vareth asked and the truths he discovered, about the moment when an ancient conqueror realized that his empire had lost its way. "General Vareth Ironscale did not save humanity," Kale said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "He reminded us that we were never broken in the first place. We had simply forgotten, beaten down by years of oppression, told so many times that we were lesser creatures that some of us started to believe it. But one Drakari, one old soldier with the courage to look past his prejudice, chose to see what we truly are. And that reminder started a fire your empire could not extinguish. He looked directly at the Drakari delegation, and there was no hatred in his eyes, only a fierce determination that made even the warriors among them shift uncomfortably. You want to know the secret of humanity? Kale continued. We are the species that builds families out of strangers and turns enemies into brothers. We do not conquer through strength alone. We conquer through connection, through compassion, through the stubborn belief that anyone can choose to be better. Vorath was a Drakari by blood, but in the end, he was one of us, and we protected him because that is what humans do. We protect our own, and we decide for ourselves who belongs to that family. Kale pulled out a document he had been working on for months, a set of laws that would reshape the galaxy, and he held it up for all to see. I propose the Vorath Accords, he announced. A binding agreement that will ensure no species can be denied food or shelter or dignity. That will make it illegal to treat any thinking being as property or prey. The opening line reads, "Let no child ask for scraps. Let no soul be made to kneel." This is the legacy of a Drakari warrior who found his honor at the end of his life. And I am asking all of you to help me build the galaxy he dreamed of. The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. And when the Vorath Accords were ratified, the chamber erupted in cheers from 100 different species. Kale stood at the podium and felt tears running down his face. And he did not try to hide them later that night, alone in his quarters. Kale held Vorath's blade and looked out at the stars that had once seemed so cold and uncaring. We did it, old friend, he whispered. We changed everything. And it all started because you saw a hungry boy and decided he was worth feeding. Thank you for teaching me that kindness is the strongest weapon in the universe. Thank you for believing in us before we believed in ourselves. Rest now. General Vorath Ironscale, your fire burns in all of us, and it will never go out. Outside the window, 1 billion stars shone in the darkness. And on 1,000 worlds, humans and their allies looked up at the same sky with hope in their hearts. The age of empires was over. The age of family had begun.